Alright, so this is lesson 28, Central Europe. You look at the map here, you see a map that shows a green area. That the darker area is what pretty much everybody agrees is Central Europe, and the lighter green stuff is an area that is sometimes considered to be Central Europe. Alright, so Central Europe, and we're also talking about Eastern Europe at this point, is economically less advanced than Western Europe. It is an agricultural or agrarian economy, farming economy, with serfs. Serfs are people who are bound to the land, remember that? That they were bound to the land, that they had to work, that they couldn't be sold away from the land. You had to sell the land to sell the serfs. And they had certain protections, certain rights that chattel slaves don't have. But, unfortunately for them, this is a time period in Eastern Europe and Central Europe where serfs are going to basically get fewer and fewer protections. Now, Central and Eastern Europe have no significant overseas empires, no significant overseas trade. Their most significant trade is supplying Western Europe with grain. And this is going to create kind of an unfair kind of trade practice. Western Europe's going to get a better deal out of this trade. So they become a dependent economy, dependent on Western Europe, which is never really a good thing. Now, political authorities in this region, Central and Eastern Europe, were weak in the 16th and early 17th century, in many cases due to a lot of warfare among the nobles of those areas fighting over various pieces of property. And the last half of the 17th century, there will be three strong dynasties that will dominate until 1918. Two of them in Central Europe, the Austrian Habsburgs and the Prussian Hohenzollerns, and one in Eastern Europe, the Russian Romanovs. There will be no strong Polish dynasty, even though Poland, at certain times in the medieval period, in the early and modern period, threatened to be powerful. Unfortunately, some of the local political practices of the Polish weakened them and made it difficult for them to compete with these centralizing empires that are starting to pop up that are trying to be absolutist. And you see the coats of arms of the Austrian Habsburgs at the top, and then the Prussian Hohenzollerns in the middle, and then the Russian Romanovs at the bottom. Now, Poland's problems are the absence of strong central authority. The Polish monarch is elected. Usually, foreigners were elected because Polish nobles were not interested in electing somebody else in Poland because they were jealous of each other. And the Sejm, which was the central assembly in Poland, was made up entirely of nobles. There's no representation for the middle class like there is in Britain with the House of Commons and like there was in France with the Third Estate. And the members of the Sejm had the power of liberum veto, which meant that any member could explode the Diet, which means that basically they say, hey, I want this meeting over with. It meant that it was very difficult to pass laws. And oftentimes these nobles could be bribed by foreign powers, which weakened Poland even more. Bribed to perform the liberum veto. The independence of these nobles that they guarded so jealously from the monarchs meant that Poland would be weak and that there would be no Poland by the late 18th century. It would be partitioned or split up between the Prussians, the Austrians, and the Russians. Now we get to the Habsburg Empire and the Pragmatic Sanction. The Austrian Habsburgs, on their own, they're going to be on their own as Spain declines in 1648, and the Peace of Westphalia is signed. This is the end of the 30 Years' War. Remember how important the 30 Years' War is for shaping politics in Europe. Habsburg power originally basically centers in the Holy Roman Empire, which required cooperation of German princes and the cities. But as they gained the Netherlands and they gained territories in northern Italy, especially Lombardy, the center of power for the Austrian Habsburgs would no longer be Germany. It would move a little further south. So what's going to happen is the Habsburgs are going to begin consolidating power outside of Germany. One of the crowns, as it's called, the crown of St. Wenceslas, are their territories of Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia. Another one of the crowns will be the crown of St. Stephen, which is a combination of Hungary, Croatia, and Transylvania. And although much of Hungary was Turkish-controlled, by 1699 the Habsburgs will actually have control of it. And in the Treaty of Rastatt, they'll get the Spanish Netherlands. I don't know why the Netherlands isn't showing on the slide, but they'll get the Spanish Netherlands. And here we see the map of their territories. You can see in the north of this map, you see north of Austria, they have control of Silesia and Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic. Also, there you see Moravia. To the east of Austria, you see Hungary. Then you see Galicia, and you will also see Transylvania, and Banat of Temesvar, and also I see Serbia and Bosnia and Dalmatia and Croatia. And then over in Italy, you see they control Venetian territories and Tuscany, etc., Lombardy. And finally, way up in the northwest, you can see that they control the Netherlands, what used to be the Spanish Netherlands, not the United Provinces. So they have a polyglot empire. They have different titles in different parts of their empire, which means that it requires local cooperation. The laws are different in different portions of their empire, so they're geographically diverse. There are diverse languages spoken in the Habsburg Empire, diverse customs, diverse religions. For example, Calvinism is strong in Hungary, and so it's very difficult for them to centralize their authority. This is going to come back to be a very difficult thing for them later on in history. And here we see Austrian Habsburg Leopold I, who ruled from 1658 to 1705. So he's ruling for a large portion of time when Louis XIV is also ruling. And he would hold off the Turks, even though they would threaten Vienna. And he would hold off Louis XIV. He would get control of Hungary by 1699. He would move into most of the Balkans and western Romania, and his focus would become Mediterranean trade through Trieste, which is interesting because, after all, we've already learned that the focus of global trade has moved away from the Mediterranean Sea and from the Indian Ocean, which we haven't learned that, but it's moved more into the Atlantic, and, well, at this point, also the Pacific is opening up as well. But Atlantic Ocean trade for Europe is going to become much more important than Mediterranean trade, and here he is. He's come late. He can't get to the Atlantic because of where his territories center, except for the Spanish Netherlands, and so he's going to focus in on this Mediterranean trade, which is not as profitable. And then his successor will be Charles VI. He will have no male heir, so his focus will be on getting the Pragmatic Sanction agreed to by various foreign rulers and also by his subjects, so that his daughter Maria Theresa can rule, which was something that was against tradition, against the custom of his empire. And it looked like everything was a go, but Maria Theresa would lack, when she took over, a strong army and a full treasury, which meant that she would be seen as weak, and this would give Frederick the Great, Frederick II of Prussia, an opportunity to push in and invade Silesia in December of 1740. So this means we're going to move into and talk about the Hohenzollerns. We're going to leave Maria Theresa and her war with Frederick the Great for a later chapter, and here we see the rise of the Hohenzollerns. They are going to fill a German power vacuum left after the 30 Years' War in the north, and they started out ruling in Brandenburg, which they began ruling in 1417. They will gain other territories, the Duchy of Cleves, the counties of Mark and Ravensburg, in 1614. If you look at this map, you can see Cleve, you can see Mark, you can see something called Minden and Osnabrück in the west portion, far away from the central property of Brandenburg. They'll gain East Prussia, which is in the far east of this map, in 1618, at the beginning of the 30 Years' War, and in the end of the 30 Years' War, they'll gain Pomerania in 1648, north of Brandenburg, along the Baltic Sea. And the thing you'll see in this map is some of these territories are not contiguous with Brandenburg. In other words, they're not connected. Just like Alaska and Hawaii are not part of the contiguous United States, the contiguous 48 connected 48 United States. And East Prussia is located in Poland, so they have to deal with those issues, with the Polish political system, and also the problems facing that area, such as the Great Northern War with Sweden and Russia duking it out. And their territories will lack resources, a lot of natural resources, and will have been devastated by the 30 Years' War. Yet, by the late 17th century, the Hohenzollern territories are second in size only to Habsburg holdings in Central Europe. And the guy who really gets this going in a big way is Frederick William, the Great Elector. He builds a modern state. He breaks up the noble estates. He organizes a royal bureaucracy, and he builds a strong army. His eastern territories were ravaged by the Swedish-Polish War, the Great Northern War. This was called the Deluge in Poland, and you can see most of Poland in 1655 was occupied. The western portion, the blue portion, occupied by Sweden. The light green portion occupied by Russia, and the little sliver of it was unoccupied in the south, wedged between the Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire. Frederick William, the Great Elector, was trying to raise money to build a strong army to deal with these kinds of issues, but there was resistance. In 1655, though, the Brandenburg tax was collected by force, even though nobles had refused to allow a new tax. In 1659, an old tax was collected, even though it lapsed, and he used this revenue to build a strong army independent of the nobility, even though they resisted these taxes. And to do this, part of it wasn't just through force. It's also there was a trade-off, politically and socially. This is another example. Just like Louis XIV managed to gain power by basically telling the nobility that he would guard their privileges, this is kind of like what Louis XIV did. Frederick William is going to give the Junkers, noble landlords. Junkers basically means young lords, so these are the lesser nobility. Stronger control of their serfs, more control over their serfs, and he's going to use them in his administration. And taxes will fall heavier on townspeople, the burghers, and peasants than it will fall on the Junkers. Junkers will dominate the officer corps, but in that process, the army has to take a loyalty oath to the Elector, so they'll identify with the Elector. And this strong army will make Prussia a player in international politics far more than they otherwise could have been. Frederick I is the first of the Hohenzollerns to be a king. He will achieve this royal title. He will be building palaces, found the Halle University, patronize the arts, and when he aids the Habsburgs in the War of Spanish Succession, he gets them to make a deal with him, and they recognize him as king in Prussia in 1701. Now we get to Frederick William I. He's eccentric, but an effective ruler. His bureaucracy is organized much like along military lines. He instills fanatical discipline into the army. He's obsessed with all things military. His army will grow to be the third or fourth largest in Europe at this time, when his territories are only 13th in population. So a very powerful military. His whole society will have a military heir. There will be separate laws for the army and citizens. The officer corps will be the highest social class, and he has this powerful army, but he will avoid wars. Frederick II, or Frederick the Great, though, will invade Silesia, ignoring the Pragmatic Sanction, and this will harden Austrian and Prussian, the Austrian and Prussian rivalry, which will lead to other wars. And so Frederick the Great is going to get in the mix.